My parents' home is in a mountain village. The village also has a cemetery, and since I was a child, my family regularly visited the cemetery. The graves are not the splendid ones one usually thinks of, but old and handmade. Nevertheless, in our village, it has been passed down from generation to generation and has been cherished. I was a child, so it must have been about 30 years ago now. As my family and I were going to visit the cemetery as usual, we passed an old lady with a crooked back and wearing what looked like black rags. Our community is not very large, so we all know each other. The old lady, however, had never been seen before. When I or my siblings ask our parents or grandparents, "Hey, who is that?" but no one opens their mouths. I couldn't help but wonder, but if the adults didn't tell me, there was nothing more I could do to find out. The old lady is crouched on an open plain off the grave, doing something. I wondered what they were doing, but eventually it was time to leave after our family's gravesite visit, and I left. Time passed, I grew up and settled in the city. His grandparents had already passed away, and although he invited them to live with him, thinking it would be a good idea for them to live alone in a remote, depopulated area, his parents said, "The place where we have lived for many years is the best place for us." Then I decided to go back to my hometown for the first time in a while and visited the cemetery because I had to. When I arrived at the grave, to my surprise, I met that old lady again, whom I had passed when I was a child. And it is exactly the same as what I saw at that time. I remembered it vividly because I had a very strong impression of the old woman. It is exactly the same as that memory. Perhaps not noticing that I was too stunned to move, the old lady ignored me and went straight to the outskirts of the grave and crouched down. It is the same situation I saw as a child. What in the world is he doing? Curious, I decided to approach it breathlessly and check it out. Blood was scattered in front of a cowering old woman. They seem to be killing and dismantling some kind of animal, and they are enthusiastically chopping up the hairy pieces of meat into small pieces with what looks like a cleaver. The unexpected sight literally made my blood boil and I almost collapsed, but I managed to hold on. I made a sound at that moment, and the old lady noticed, turned around, and her eyes met mine. Feeling that my life was in danger, I could no longer visit the cemetery and ran home desperately anyway. When I told my parents about this incident, they listened with surprising ease and finally opened their heavy mouths. In fact, when I was a child, I noticed that my parents also passed that old lady at the cemetery. That the old lady is a descendant of a taboo family. They are a non-existent presence in the community and rarely appear in public, so they have kept it a secret from their children until now. The place where the old woman was crouched means that there is a grave of her family. But here's the funny thing. At the time I saw her as a child, she was a very old lady. It is still alive and well 30 plus years later, and yet it has not changed in appearance. What is the meaning of this? My parents said, there are things in the world that are better left untouched. Besides, almost no one knows about the old days anymore, even mom and dad don't seem to know the details. Perhaps my grandfather would have known something, but of course he is no longer dead. In the end, the truth was in the dark. My hometown is no longer a marginal community and will disappear in the near future. Was that old lady a ghost? Even if they were people, they may no longer be human but monsters. It seems somewhat sad to think that the old lady's existence will remain a mystery, buried and forgotten. I do not have any experience of seeing ghosts, but since my school days, I have occasionally been in a kinbaku situation. But I knew that if I told people about such events, they would not believe me, so I digested them in my own mind. I would like to share my experience here, so if you are interested in reading through it, consider it a soliloquy. The earliest time I had a kinbaku was when I was in high school. It happened while I was at home resting. I strongly remember that I did not know that kinbaku existed, so I endured it anyway, sweating. At that time, I don't know if the dream was real or not, but I remember that teacher A from school was trying to help me. Why Dr. A came up is a mystery, and I don't mean to be rude, but he was not a teacher I liked or was involved with. When I went to school the next day, I learned that this teacher A was very ill and had to take the day off from school. Then, Dr. A lost his battle with illness and did not return home. After that, I began to experience kinbaku several times, probably around the time I entered the workforce. I was already used to the kinbaku, so I knew that if I endured it, it would eventually break. As I was wondering if it would end soon, my grandfather came out. When I say it came out, I am not sure if it is the right expression, and I myself cannot decide if it is a dream or reality, but the image of my grandfather came to me. I had a bad feeling about what was going to happen, and as I expected, I received a call from my parents' home the next day, asking me to come home because my grandfather had suddenly become critically ill. I knew the word precognition, but it was at this point that I began to suspect that my own kinbaku might be of that sort. However, it is not as easy to research as it is today, and I don't think my friends and family would believe me if I told them. The next time I had this kind of kinbaku was about 10 years ago when I was on a business trip for work. The person who came out of the house at the time of this golden moment was my boss, who was out with me. The boss does not show up at the venue the next morning at mealtime. I thought it was impossible and went to check my boss's room. He was dead. The cause of death was myocardial infarction. I would like to think it is just a coincidence, but after experiencing it 3 times, I have a hunch that I have precognition. I can't talk to anyone about it because I guess I can't control it at will, and if it's a good thing, it's still a sign of unhappiness, so I want to keep it to myself from now on. This is just a coincidence, I'm sure. The large number of strangers who showed up today when I was in a golden haze had absolutely nothing to do with it. I'm sure. When I was in middle school, my uncle told me a story. This happened decades ago. My uncle was a local government official in a small town with a population of about 10,000 at the time. By the way, I lived in that town until I was 18. Topographically speaking, the town was mountainous on the north side and flat on the south. Because of its small population and rural location, the entire town has a rural landscape. And at the foot of the mountain, which was almost uninhabited, a town crematorium was set up. A crematorium is a huge, conspicuous chimney. The residents realized that another person died every time smoke rose from the huge chimney. It is a rural town, so when the smoke rises, they are interested in who died. Because there was not much entertainment available, the country people showed an unusual interest in the weddings and funerals of the same townspeople. So he said that he came to my uncle's house to ask, "Who died yesterday?" In the old days, concepts such as privacy and protection of personal information did not exist as they do today. Even though he was a local government employee, he said, he had blabbed about what he knew. Eventually, when the death certificate was filed with the authorities and the crematorium was approved, the residents began gossiping among themselves. Information about the residents around the crematorium was particularly accurate. For example, when he heard a rumor from a resident that, "I heard that person died," he actually saw smoke billowing out of the chimney a few days later, which made him realize that, oh, he really died. If there are no rumors beforehand, they come to ask who died after the smoke has gone out. At some point, a mysterious phenomenon began to occur. Many residents living near the crematorium told us that smoke was coming out of the chimneys, even though they had not heard of any deaths. At first, the residents thought that the crematorium was probably being repaired, or that a new machine had been installed and they were burning something to test it out. But 6 times in 6 months, smoke came out of the chimney, even though we had not heard of any resident deaths. The death has not been reported to the town hall. Since that time, many residents have found this strange. There was an even stranger point. The residents know the hours the crematorium operates, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. However, there was sometimes smoke coming out of the chimneys early in the morning or late at night after hours, or on days when the chimneys were closed. The neighbors became suspicious and told my uncle about the mysterious phenomenon at the crematorium. My uncle thought that was strange, so he first decided to split up with the residents of the surrounding area to monitor the crematorium from a distance starting at midnight in order to find out what was happening at the crematorium. Then one morning, at around 5 a.m., the crematorium manager came to work, and shortly thereafter, a van entered the crematorium. The residents who were watched the coffin being taken out of the wagon, but according to the residents, the physiognomy of these people was frightening. Apparently, he was a person living in the underworld. The crematorium manager seemed accustomed to these people and said he was helping them carry them in. After further monitoring, the lights came on and it appeared that work had begun. Then, a few minutes later, there was a faint sound from the grilling area. He said that he heard a cry. The residents who had been watching were startled and sat up, but they desperately fled back to their homes. From then on, no one would gossip about the crematorium, pretending not to see any suspicious smoke coming out of the chimney. There may be some things in the world that are better left unknown.